It was a short walk from kindergarten to home for 6-year-old Dorothy Distelhurst, but in September 1934, she never appeared. Dorothy was the daughter of Alfred Edgar Distelhurst and his second wife, Ruby. He'd lived in New York with his first wife, Amanda, and his son, Alfred Edgar Jr., born in 1916, but she had died in 1926, aged 31. Edgar, as he was known, then met and married Ruby Hamilton, and she gave birth to Dorothy on 13th January 1928. Then on 13th June 1930, Martha Jane was born. The family were by no means rich, but were comfortable. They settled in East Nashville in Tennessee, having lived in Texas and Georgia, but by 1934, Alfred Edgar Jr. had moved out and was living in Florida. Wednesday, 19 September 1934, began like any other Wednesday. Edgar left for work at the Methodist Publishing House of Nashville, where he was employed as a sales or accounts manager, while Ruby waved goodbye to Dorothy as she set out for the kindergarten where she was enrolled. The little girl was wearing a blue and white checked dress and carried both her school books and her small pink lunchbox. It's known the little girl spent the day in her class and left at the end of the school day to head the 2 or 3 blocks home, but she never arrived. Ruby became anxious fairly quickly, as her daughter was never late back to the house. After a short time, she called the police. A description of Dorothy was circulated. She was 4 feet tall, weighed 55 pounds, had straight light brown hair which was bobbed, and brown eyes. A search for the little girl got underway, but nothing was found. The family and the police were well aware of the rise of kidnapping cases in the US in the 1930s, but they weren't a wealthy family, so that seemed unlikely. But the idea wasn't completely dismissed out of hand. Journalists soon got wind of the missing girl, and the story hit the national papers as well as the local ones. Alfred Edgar Jr. returned to the family home as soon as he heard what had happened to his sister. But like in many cases, the crackpots soon got to work, and ransom letters began to appear. Police dismissed most of them, but there was one that would later stand out. It was a postcard postmarked from Augusta in Georgia, and handwritten on the back was a demand for $175,000 for the safe return of Dorothy. Otherwise, the little girl would be blinded with acid. In another, a ransom of $5,000 was received, but again, police believed these were hoaxes. Police questioned known offenders, while locals helped in the search in the local area. But nothing came to light. It was as if the little girl had simply vanished into thin air. In November, Distelhurst went to New York with his brother-in-law, Lloyd Hamilton, and stayed in the Hotel New Yorker, ready to meet Alfred Otto Wagner, the man who'd written the $5,000 ransom note. He'd even managed to scrape together $1,000 which he took with him. He anxiously waited for days for contact to be made, pacing up and down the hotel lobby during the day and staying in his room at night as instructed. Sleep didn't come easy, and by the end of his time in the city, he was completely exhausted. As it turned out, police were right in this case. Wagner was a fraud and didn't know the Nashville area. In the end, he was charged with extortion. It was during his time in New York that Distelhurst received news that Dorothy had been found. On Tuesday, 13th November, at Davidson County Tuberculosis Hospital in Inglewood, north of East Nashville, 2 labourers were digging flower beds at a secluded corner of the hospital when they made a gruesome discovery. Under just a few inches of soil, they found the badly decomposing body of a little girl. It had been hidden by shrubs. Around 3 yards away, a blue and white check dress, school books, and a pink lunchbox were discovered. The girl had suffered blunt force trauma to her head, possibly caused by a hammer or something similar, and it was noticed, even through the decomposition, that her face had been badly disfigured by what medical examiner Herman Spitz suspected to be acid. A rag was found stuffed in her mouth, but she had not been sexually assaulted. It was determined the body had been stored elsewhere for several weeks before being buried in the garden. Dr. Spitz called in the help of Dorothy's dentist, Dr. Leonard F. Pogue, who had given Dorothy a small filling in one of her baby teeth. It was concluded that the body was that of the missing girl. A man's white shirt and a torn piece of a cardboard box were also found that Tuesday nearby. Detectives now knew they were not only looking for the kidnapper, but also the murderer. It was also around this time that it was made public Dorothy was one of 8 beneficiaries of a $100,000 trust fund established by her late grandfather, Mr. H.E. Distelhurst, a real estate operator at Newark in New Jersey. So did someone find out about this? A week after the discovery, a metal spike was discovered between 20 and 25 feet from the deposition site, with a few hairs attached to it, possibly the murder weapon, but nothing came of this. Who had killed her remains speculative, but police believed it was someone local, especially due to where Dorothy's remains were found. Had they been watching her as she made her way to kindergarten? On 16th November, Dorothy's funeral service was held at the Belmont Methodist Church. Then she was laid to rest in the Woodlawn Cemetery. Her family died without knowing who had killed their daughter and sister, or why. Distelhurst and his wife moved to Virginia following his retirement and lived out the rest of their lives quietly. He died on 2nd October 1972, aged 81. Ruby moved back to Tennessee and passed away 13 years later, on 16th July 1985, aged 89. Dorothy's sister, Martha Jane, died on 1st July 1973, aged 43, and her brother Alfred Jr. had died on 9th January 1943 while on active service during World War II. This case remains unsolved.